everybody.
Hi. Hey. Hello.
We have the whole team.
Yes.
I think that might be the fastest the three of us have ever been able to get onto an IG Live. I'm pretty proud of us. Things are moving in the right direction in our technology suite here. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Instagram Live. I'm Regina Sons here at Kosta Browne, joined with our winemaker, Julian Housepian, and our assistant winemaker, Mr. Peter Virtue. Hi, Drew. I've seen some nice comments and waves in the chat. Thanks, everybody, as always, for joining. We're going to talk about some really cool wines today. We went live with our single vineyard designate offer yesterday. That offer runs until August 24th. So if you have been offered an allocation as one of our very loyal Kosta Browne members, please log into your account and check out the wines that you've been offered. There are 12 wines potentially in this offer, depending on where you are on your journey with us. And we're going to taste 6 of them today, 2 of which are brand new to the lineup, and some favorites that many of you, I'm sure, are aware of, and talk a little bit about the 2021 vintage. Hi, Kyle. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Before we taste our very first wine, which I am bubbling with excitement to taste, let's have Peter talk to us a little bit about the 2021 vintage, and maybe even contrast to what we're seeing right now in the 23 vintage. I think guests are always really interested to understand from a winemaking perspective, what's that like? What does that mean, you know, when ripening happens? What does that mean in the cellar? What's the reality of vintage for us on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, cool. That was a great joke, Regina, by the way. I just could not resist. Oof.
Ooh, we're really just, you know, getting there, getting it started.
Perfect.
Everyone else will be in on the joke shortly.
That was great. So yeah, speaking of great things, the 21 vintage, that was basically, in a nutshell, it was successful, but it was an optimal vintage. You know, you kind of think of it in terms of success. I mean, in comparison, close comparison, vintage-wise to like 19 and 20, where we all know 19 and 20 pretty well, but for people that aren't in Sonoma County, huge heat waves, obviously massive wildfires, and the 21 vintage, we did not have to put up with, thankfully, any of that. And so in that sense, it was a success, obviously. In comparison to the 23 vintage right now, this vintage is not done, so it's a book that doesn't have the final chapter, which is always the best part of the book, I think. At least that's how I read books, just one chapter, the very last one, maybe even the last page.
Right.
So we still have that going for us, at least anyways, but in comparison, weather-wise, it's been cool, the 23 vintage, and we're roughly a month behind average. So to draw a comparison, if you can kind of reach all the way back to 2011, which also was my first vintage in the wine industry and my first vintage at Kosta Browne, so I remember it well. We didn't bring in any fruit until after Labor Day, so interns had the holiday off, which is weird, but we'll see if that happens again. So as far as the 21 vintage quality-wise, as I mentioned, no heat waves that would impact it. That definitely was the latter part of the vintage. But at the beginning, it was a pretty dry and cold winter to start the growing season off. And so, that kind of keeps the vines in their dormancy. And, mid-spring, it starts to warm up and, they come out of dormancy into bud break and flowering, and thankfully we had cold temperatures, and that kind of aligned with the bud break to warm up. There are a couple of vineyards that had a little bit of frost damage, but it was essentially not noteworthy. and after flowering, really moderate, really even keeled temperatures throughout. The late spring, early summer was perfect, and it was kind of a coast into the finish line. We didn't have to make any kind of sacrifices, so to speak, with picks between our different appellations, and now that we're sort of extended from Northern California to Southern California, and that's a real thing for us, because we harvest and ferment everything here at Sebastopol, and so when you cross appellations like that, there's a lot of lots, and could get difficult. But thankfully, the vintage allowed us to pick and choose, and I think that that'll show in every wine that we taste today. Not only that we taste, but that anybody tastes from Kosta Browne for the 21 vintage. It was stellar.
I couldn't agree with you more, Peter. I think that in my memory, looking back on 21 was this breath of literal fresh air and a much needed, right? And a much needed break from some pretty challenging, times both in the vineyard and also in the world, honestly, in 2020, as I'm sure many of you remember. And it felt like it was Mother Nature giving us a good omen and a good opportunity. And I agree with you. I think these wines from 21 are spectacular, and what you can really do with a really supreme vintage. And to kind of take us into talking about some silver linings that might have come from 2020. Julian, take us away. I think we're very, very, very excited to introduce the very first 2020 vintage sparkling wine from Kosta Browne. I have been waiting 3 long years to hold this bottle up and freak out over this fantastic Blanc de Blanc, 100% Chardonnay from the Kiefer Ranch, where Julian lives. Julian, tell us all about this wine. Tell us about the journey to this wine and how we made such a tiny amount of it and how it's such a labor of love.
Yeah, thank you. So, anyone who loves wine, I would say, has a soft spot in their heart for sparkling wine, champagne, and the like. And we've always wanted to make sparkling wine. And we actually got pretty close to producing a sparkling wine in 2015. We had kind of more or less committed to it. We had started to devise a plan. Ultimately, we kind of pulled the e-brake on it because we had a moment of reflection that we decided that we still wanted to continue to craft our Pinot Noir and Chardonnay production. So as much as we wanted to try something different, which is, sparkling wine is a very, very different thing. We also showed some restraint and decided that we wanted to continue to sharpen the edge on Pinot and Chardonnay still wine before getting into sparkling wine. So that was the first, moment that we had, kind of planted the seed back in 2015. And in 2020, the seed kind of, finally sprouted because we decided that we were going to make, part of our Kiefer Ranch, which is historically been the bottom section of Kiefer has always gone to sparkling production. So many other people have made sparkling wines from the vineyard, and in 2020 we decided to do it ourselves. So we worked with some people to help us kind of get up to speed in terms of how to make sparkling wine, because sparkling wine is a very, very, very different process. But what we had going for us is we had a unique style of Chardonnay that we produce. And when we were getting advice on what to do, we were tasting the still wines that we made, and everyone was like, okay, this is a tremendous approach to making the sparkling wine. Basically, do it the exact same, but adapt it to the sparkling wine process, and you're going to have a phenomenal product, something that's unique, something that's different, something that's distinguished and of very high quality. And, we put a lot of thought into it. We put a lot of effort, and we drank a lot of sparkling wine along the way to make sure that we were staying on course. But in the end, we produced something that we're all just overly proud of, very enthusiastic. It's a long process. We decided to go with a vintage sparkling wine from a specific vineyard, so that is in itself a little bit unusual. But we knew that Kiefer Ranch had the makeup to do that, and being in the heart of Green Valley, it was a very, very safe bet that we would be able to produce on an annual basis something spectacular and something that can stand up to a vintage single vineyard sparkling wine year in and year out. So we did a little bit of new oak on the fermentation and aging, only 9 months total. So we did 15% new oak. The rest of it was aged in oak barrel and a little bit of oak cask, used oak cask. We stored it in stainless steel for a number of months. We bottled it unfiltered on tirage. On tirage is the process where the second fermentation occurs in bottle. So we carried out the secondary fermentation in bottle. We aged it for 2 more years, and then just last week we disgorged it. So that's a process of expelling the yeast that was residing in the bottle from the second fermentation, and converting it from basically a beer cap to a cork with the cage and the final package. So, and as well as adding a little bit of dosage, we were playing around with the different levels of dosage that we could add to the wine, and ultimately we decided on a very, very, very small addition, and it's a extra brut. So it only has 3.25 grams of sugar added to the wine. And that little tiny bit just helps give it a little bit of richness and soften the corners a little bit. But, at the end of the day, you taste this wine and you would never even know that there's any dosage in it. It came out really, really beautiful. Blanc de Blanc, 100% Chardonnay, 100% from the 2020 vintage. And it is truly, truly superb.
Cheers.
Again, all my bubbling jokes. I've said this many a time on this channel, but in the past, it takes a lot of champagne, basically, or sparkling wine in this winery to make Kosta Browne, because all of us love it so much. So the opportunity to actually make it was really, really exciting. I just wanted to add a little bit of color for those that may or may not be the wine nerds following along. That sugarness level that Julian was explaining, about 3.25 grams per liter. When you see a bottle that says brut from any sparkling producer, that means it can have up to 6 grams per liter. So this is half again a dry style of champagne, meaning not a sweet style. So this is very dry, or extra brut, meaning it's really bright. It's very dry on the palate. A lot of American sparkling wines I have found typically are more in the Prosecco style. So a lot more citrus fruit, a lot more maybe additional residual sugar that they've encouraged. Julian and Peter, I think, really nailed it in, listen, the fruit that we're getting off of Kiefer Ranch is calling for more of a traditional champagne style. So there's some autolytic quality. There's, when I say autolytic, like brioche or bread and lemon rind and Parmesan cheese and freshness and acidic, and it's freaking delicious. So, Peter, I'll let you give a couple more comments on it. But clearly I am a big fan of this wine.
Yeah, I am too. I think probably two of the best parts of producing sparkling wine, the first vintage at least anyways, is the tasting of other sparkling wines for sure. That was a lot of fun. We definitely stayed the course and kind of figured out our style. But the other part of that really fun process is actually making it in the cellar. And that's kind of, that was also a really terrific part. Totally, new process, new pressing. I mean, everything was new about it. And so, that's just another part of the process that we all get to sort of enjoy. So I think this wine, I mean, the brioche aspect, the sort of brighter sort of citrus blossoms really kind of stand out to me too. I would definitely agree.
Yeah, and if I could add, I think that this wine is delicious today, but I think it'll definitely last for a long time. But what I love about this wine the most actually is the mousse, and the mousse is how fine the bubbles are on the palate. And when you have a very, very fine mousse, you can't even like really feel like the individual bubbles. You just feel the whole thing all at once, and it's very fine, it's very delicate, and it's something that we were really chasing after, that we wanted to make sure that the bubbles were like really, really, really kind of smooth and just, it's hard to describe. You got to try it. It's really, really fantastic. The bubbles are nice. The wine is great. I encourage y'all to get it. We don't have much, only a couple hundred cases. So, but over the next couple of years, we already have the 21 vintage Entourage. We have the 22 vintage Entourage, and we are producing more. So there will be more to spread around in the future, but this year was a small one. So,
like I said, teeny tiny to start, and thank you for the questions about the allocations. The allocations went out yesterday. Knowing obviously that we have such a small amount of this, we weren't able to allocate it to a ton of people. So definitely, if you do have an allocation, scoop it up, because it's a tiny amount this first year. All right, jumping into, I think maybe we do the next two wines together. The Santa Lucia Highlands appellation in 2020 suffered from some pretty tough wildfires. Many of you may recall, unfortunately, we were not able to make wines from that vintage, but 2021, much like in all of California, was a phenomenal vintage, also in Santa Lucia Highlands. So we have both the Rosellas and the Garys back as part of our 2021 release. So, Julian, maybe you want to kick us off with the Rosellas, and then Peter, jump in and kind of chat about Garys as well.
Yeah. So, first of all, Santa Lucia Highlands is about 2.5 to 3 hours south of Sebastopol. So it's not necessarily next door, but it's definitely, a day trip there and back type of situation for us. And we're really, really close with the growers down there, the Pissonis and the Franchionis. They are truly some of the best growers in the United States in terms of viticulture. They also do a lot of other vegetables, row crops, fruits, the whole bit. So they are truly, truly professionals. And in 2021, I was really focused on nailing all of those picks. And there's a relationship between, Kosta Browne, the Pissonis, the Franchionis, and we were like surgeons down there in 21. I mean, we were picking down to the bins. It was an incredible thing that we were doing, because they send trucks up north every day once harvest gets going. So I was filling in little bits of fruit on like every truck, every other truck, like every 2 or 3 days. We were just getting little bits and pieces, picking it precisely to the tank sizes that I wanted to put the fruit in. I was like, I'd call up Gary. I'd be like, Gary, I want like 3.5 tons of Rosellas. I want 2 tons of 777. I want, 1.5 tons of 828, because I have a wooden tank open right now. Like, let's do this. And what would show up at the door? 3.5 tons on the nose. Sometimes, it's all getting picked at night. Things get a little wild out there. All of a sudden you have an extra bin and a half, right? I mean, like somebody's not paying attention, and an 8th bin gets filled, a 9th bin gets filled, and all of a sudden 4.3 tons shows up at the winery. And, like we have to put in stainless steel. Not that that's the end of the world, but the precision on the picking in 21 was excellent. And I was a little bit, in a way, self-conscious of like how they felt. Did they think I was being like, kind of annoying, like, with all these requests and the frequency and all these different things? And after harvest, they were like, no, dude, like you freaking nailed it. Like we are all into it. Like that's great for us also, because we were able to fill the last 2, 3, 4 tons of every truckload with a little bit of fruit, as opposed to like sending 20 tons at a time, for example, up to Kosta Browne. So I found the vintage to be very successful in terms of intent and executing, and a testament to the partnership with the Franchionis and the Pissonis. So with that, Rosella's Vineyard, this is the northernmost vineyard that we source grapes from in Santa Lucia Highlands. It's closest to Monterey Bay. Theoretically, it's the coolest site, perhaps, or at least we can say it has the strongest coastal fog influence. It's the first vineyard to have the fog reach its shores. And then as the fog recedes and blows off in the afternoon, it's the last fog to kind of burn off. So it is the most temperate in terms of the climate. It's the closest to the coast, so it's a little bit windier. It's a little bit, moderate based on the proximity. But also, it has a couple different clones. It has 777, has 828, and it also has Pisoni. Whereas the other two Santa Lucia Highland wines are Pisoni only. So this wine, due to the coastal influence as well as the clonal selections, it has a little bit more perfume, it has a little bit more elegance, it has a little bit more suppleness, and I think it's a really gorgeous wine. Like if you were to say, well, which wine from Santa Lucia is the most elegant and the most perfumey and pretty, I would say Rosella's is the wine, the softest wine, the most floral, perhaps even the lightest in color. But really fantastic wine in 2021. And in general, Santa Lucia Highlands had a great year, a great growing season as well. So I thought the wine turned out really well.
And I'll kind of jump in to tee you up, Peter, as well. The story behind these two wines, for those of you who are not aware, we have been making wine from the Santa Lucia Highlands, working with Gary Francione and Gary Pisoni since, I believe, 2003. Somebody check my date there. And it's a pretty funny story wherein the founders went down there and there was may or may not have been a naked cannonball into a pond in order to secure the grape contract and relationship there. Two guys named Gary Francione and Gary Pisoni, hence Gary's plural on the bottle. And their characters, and I think the wine really reflects it. So take it away, Peter. Tell us what you think about this wine.
Well, that's probably one of the coolest things about the SLH family is that everyone knows who the Garys are in SLH, and our opinion of them as far as growers and individuals is shared amongst all of the wineries that are down there, and so it's really. It's a treat to deal with those characters, so to speak, and I would totally agree with Julian too. When I think of SLH and Rosellas, I think elegance, some floral notes, but some blood orange too, and maybe even probably some like crushed raspberries, those kinds of notes. It's a really terrific wine. As far as when we go through blending sessions, when you taste the wine 4 times, 8 times, 12 times, you kind of sort of get inundated with all of these aromatics that it's really difficult to sort of pick and choose what you want to talk about. And for me specifically, I find it so much easier to talk about tannin, talk about balance, talk about acid, mouthfeel, texture, those kinds of things, because at the end of the day, I can taste wine longer focusing on those than I can with aromatics. And so, when I look at Rosellas specifically, the elegance is there. It's the tannin is just very polished. And we'll go on to Gary's, and that's also polished, but it's a different kind of polish. And you look at Gary's, and that's sort of opulence. And Rosellas is just very fine-tuned. It's like elegant is the perfect word to use for Rosellas.
Totally agreed. And I remember a trip that Julian and I made to Santa Lucia Highlands some years back now. And we went to the vineyard, and there is this just element of chaparral was the word that I learned at the time. But it's this beautiful kind of sagebrush aromatic that you have just in the air of the areas around the vineyard. And maybe it's psychosomatic, but I definitely get a beautiful sagebrush element. I get that tangerine and sort of lime skin, orange skin rather in the wine. There's a beautiful fruit and freshness To Peter's point, the tannic structure on this wine will last forever. But to the credit of these two gentlemen, the ability to make a wine that you can enjoy now and will stand the test of time is a challenge, and I think well done. It's very hard to make a wine that tastes great now, but will also last for 15 years, so 15, 20 years beyond. So delicious, delicious stuff on these two wines. Alrighty, let's bring it home to Sonoma County, Sonoma Coast. We've got two in the lineup today that we're going to be enjoying. That is the Thorn Ridge Vineyard in Sebastopol Hills area within the Sonoma Coast. And we have the Gaps Crown Vineyard, which is a tried and true. I'm sure you have all seen and loved this wine over the years. The reason we chose these two wines is these two wines are both from the Sonoma Coast appellation. The vineyards themselves are only about 20 miles away from one another, and both of those vineyards are about 20 to 30 miles from the Pacific Ocean. But these two wines are so, so different. And I think it's really, especially in the same vintage, same winemaking team, it's really neat to be able to taste those different flavors. So Julian, take us away and kind of talk about how you work with both of these vineyards and sort of what you're looking for in the cellar and just generally the difference. I mean, shoot, you can even tell this one's like super opaque. This is the Gaps Crown, and this one's far more transparent and cranberry color, just in the color alone.
Yeah. So Thorn Ridge, that vineyard originally came into the fold in, I think, 2014. We played around with a observation type single vineyard wine. And then in 2016, we rolled it into the single vineyard series for good. And at the time, this was, in 14 especially, but in 16, we hadn't been making wine in Anderson Valley yet, nor in Santa Rita. And this wine, Thorn Ridge, was very distinct from everything else that we were making. I remember, tasting fermentations, classic Nico Cueva, old winemaker. He'd be like, dude, you got to check this out, man. He'd put the glass in your nose and taste it. And it was always distinct. It was, you could almost, identify it at, on like the 10th day of fermentation. And so it kind of represented the bookend of the profile, in terms of Sonoma Coast, a little bit more of like the saginess, earthiness mixed in with the bramble, the raspberry, the cranberry, a little bit of blackberry. But it definitely had a little bit of an earthy note that, like a little bit of a tea, like how a nice tea smells on the wine. And so that was what we really appreciated about the Thorn Ridge. It's what we kind of celebrated. I mean, Pinot Noir is about terroir. It's about distinction and the site expressing something different from the next site. And Thorn Ridge, to me, absolutely encompasses that. And so this wine, it's got plenty of fruit, because when I describe wine, I mean, we're talking about California Pinot Noir. The fruit is always the lead singer. It's always going to take center stage. It's just how expressive is the fruit going to be? Is it going to be, kind of one-dimensional fruit, or is it going to be a little bit more, a little bit more diverse in terms of its flavor? So Thorn, I think, is a beautiful expression of fruit and earth kind of mixing really well together. Very, very soft. When we talk about when we talk about acid, this is a higher pH. So that means it's got less acid. And it's got like a little bit of a rounder, richer feel to it. So it kind of creates like this suppleness, which is really, really beautiful as well. We've only been making the single vineyard, consistently since 2016. And these wines, I mean, the Thorn Ridge particularly ages really, really, really well. I think it's because of the saginess and a little bit of floral and the fruit, the way that kind of unfolds over time is very unique and expresses itself beautiful after a couple of years. But then again, it's wonderful today. I would drink this tonight if I had the choice.
Love it.
I think you do
Now,
have the choice, Julian. You definitely can drink whatever you want from KB.
yeah, I know.
Turns out.
It's only, yeah, that's true. That's a problem. I mean, 30 something wines and counting. That's more days than in a month. If I wanted to drink one wine a month.
No, I don't share your problem, man. I have no problem doing that in 15 days.
So and Gaps, just to quickly go to Gaps, I know that Peter loves Gaps as well, so I definitely want to give him a chance to describe it. But I think that Gaps is year in and year out a consistently excellent wine. It's one of our biggest single vineyards that we make. We own a part of the vineyard, 38 acres of a 120-acre vineyard. It's the most widely available single vineyard that we make. It's also the bedrock of our Sonoma Coast blend because, half of the grapes go into Sonoma Coast, half of it goes into, the remainder is the single vineyard blend. And this wine is truly exceptional. It's got this beautiful balance of approachable, likable, it's like this friendly, spirit that you just, sometimes you meet people and you just kind of like, I like that person. I don't know why, but they just got this vibe that is really, really cool. And that's Gaps Crown. Year in and year out, they show up. There's never an off day. There's never a bad day for Gaps Crown. So it's a little bit juicier, a little bit more fruit forward compared to the Thorn Ridge, but, very, very pleasing. And, definitely one of my top wines year in and year out.
You've said before, Julian, to echo that, Gaps is Springsteen on a Harley riding along the Sonoma Coast. Just unapologetic, just here for the show. Tee up, Peter. What you got?
Yeah, you know what? To add in another sort of descriptor to Gaps, Michael Brown used to say that Gaps is, if you were to call it a TV show, would be Friends, where there's a character for every person, and every person's dislike. There's also a character too, but Gaps is absolutely terrific. Julian's right. I definitely have a soft spot for Gaps. I'm fortunate enough to actually be able to see Gaps from my back deck. Not Kiefer, but Gaps. But it's a really terrific vineyard. Julian mentioned that it's one of our larger vineyards, and that's one of the fun parts about having a large vineyard, owning some of it as well. We have all kinds of levers that we can pull, and we can pick this block, we can do that with this block. There's also a ton of clones out there, and so it just kind of is all of a sudden Pandora's box. You've got all these spices that you can sort of use, and it's such a fun vintage with Gaps because you could just do so many different ferments, so many different clones, so many different treatments too, a little bit of whole cluster, carbonic. I mean, the world is your oyster at that point, and it's really, really fun, really fun. As far as blending it is concerned, that's also another part of Gaps that makes it difficult and fun. I don't know how many times I can say fun, but I don't know if there's a law against it. Should be now. But, being a large vineyard, we have a lot of different ferments of it. And so sort of going through the list and sort of picking and choosing, it's paradise. It really is. And so we get to sort of shape, and we get to be a part of that whole process, and it's terrific. And so year in, year out, there's so much consistency to Gaps too, because it is such a large vineyard, and it's a terrific wine. Tannin, acid, those kinds of things, Gaps is approachable for sure. I completely agree. It also kind of like has this, this enveloping characteristic where it's sort of like the tannins sort of give way to a pretty long finish. And, that, to me at least anyways, that polish of tannins kind of continues to sort of float on the back palate for quite a while. And, age-wise, this is gonna be around for quite some time.
I'm
and it is the bookend.
Good.
Oh,
Go,
sorry. I was
ahead.
just going to say, Julian mentioned the bookend as far as Thorn. Gaps is the other bookend too for Sonoma Coast for us. Thorn, Gaps, I mean, you couldn't have two dissimilar, two different children. You love them both the same. I may be partial to Gaps though.
I love that. And I'm really glad you brought up the subject of tannin and acid, sort of from an education standpoint, right? The trifecta of how a wine will age is what is the tannic structure, what is the acid profile, and what is the overall sort of fruit characteristic of any wine, especially if you're hoping it can age. And Julian and I actually talk about this quite a bit. You know, when you describe a wine that is rich can have a lot of different meanings to a lot of different people. So, you know, if a wine is super, super tannic, where it feels like, you know, you might have a sweater in your mouth and you really just want to eat a piece of cheese or eat a piece of meat to kind of balance out that tannin, that can be considered a rich wine and have no fruit, like Barolo. Or you could have a wine that's very, very fruity, but have no tannin. And so that could be considered rich because it's very, you know, full-bodied from a fruit perspective. So I think what's really important as we talk about wine is to just identify for you, do you prefer wines that are more fruit forward? Do you prefer wines that are more structured, meaning have more tannin? Do you prefer wines that are more acid forward, like myself? I lick lemons for fun, so I clearly like really bright acidic wines. Just kind of deciding what you prefer, and that will really help a sommelier, one of our advisors on the phone if you're calling in to ask questions, myself, anyone, to kind of guide you in the direction of the wines that you might like, because all of the wines we make are so different. Some are more fruit, some are more acid, some are more herbal, some are more tannic. It all really just kind of depends on what you are after. One other last plug and shout out for Gaps Crown. I remember very vividly my first vintage here at KB. I spent a few weeks in the cellar, or actually about a week in the cellar with the team, and there was a really cool fermentation lot that came in that was an extended fermentation in one of the vessels, and Julian was having me do punch downs. And if you've never done a punch down in a fermentation vessel by hand, you will sweat, you will go to the gym. It's very hard work. And to answer the question about if you can get a hat, you got to work in the damn cellar to get a hat. So whoever wants one of those hats, we'll see you at Harvest and you can get a hat. With that, the last wine that we have today is, drum roll, another new wine for us. We started working in Oregon in the Willamette Valley in the year 2021. We had an Appellation blend that released as part of our Appellation series in the spring. And we're very proud to present the 2021 inaugural vintage of the Shea Vineyard in Willamette Valley. Very, very famous vineyard. So Julian, take it away, talk about our decision to work with Dick Shea and kind of the history there and all that.
Yeah. So, you know, when we decided that we wanted to expand our horizons and venture into the Willamette Valley, Shea Vineyard was the obvious first choice as to a target and a goal to source fruit from and produce a single vineyard from. You know, Dick Shea, he's you know, a legendary figure in Willamette Valley. He he was formerly a Wall Street guy. He lived in New York City, loved wine, and made trips to wine country. Came out to the Willamette Valley and fell in love with the wines that were being produced out there. This is like, you know, in the late 80s, you know, and he decided to take a chance. I want to know where these chances exist in this current world, but he took a chance on Yamhill Carlton, which at the time was not a region that was producing a lot of grapes, and so he was one of the first people to grow grapes in Yamhill Carlton, which is the north, kind of like on the northern edge, a little bit on the western side of Willamette Valley. It's a little bit of a warmer part of the appellation, and he planted about 100 acres out there and found relatively early success. Actually, to be honest, his story of grape growing is not that much different from Kosta Browne in terms of our story from a winery's perspective, where you're the newcomer, you know, not a lot of experience in the field, takes a chance on something new, and, you know, within a short time found found something very successful. And so early days, he was he a couple producers started making some wine that really stood out, and Shea Vineyard became a very, very popular vineyard in the region. So anyway, when we decided that we wanted to become winemakers in Willamette Valley, we called up Dick, and Dick was like, I've been waiting for this phone call for like 10 years, because he even approached, I don't recall, to be honest, if it was Michael Browne or Dan Kosta, but this is like, I don't know, late 2000s, 2009, 2010. And he said, hey, have you ever thought about making wine in Willamette Valley? And they were like, no, we haven't. We're not interested. And he's like, well, when you do, call me. And sure enough, we did the same. We did call him, and he was thrilled. And he, at the time, didn't even have any fruit to sell. But he was like, you know what? When Kosta Browne calls to buy fruit, you make things happen. And he peeled off a little bit of fruit from his top block, Block 29, Vaudinsville clone, and he took it out of his own fruit that was supposed to go to his winery, and said, this is yours. And so we had a little bit of fruit to work with from Vaudinsville clone and 114. And we made a really, really beautiful blend. In terms of its character, it's a little bit, to Regina's point, it's sometimes difficult to describe wine because it's a little bit lighter in terms of its body and its richness, but it's heavier in its tannin. So it's got a firmer tannin profile. It's got less kind of filling and richness, but it's a big wine. I mean, it's got broad shoulders. It's got, some firm tannins, and the aromatics are really, really beautiful. Being the first time that we made a Shea single vineyard, we were unsure of what we were supposed to make, and so we let the fruit kind of really drive us forward, and we used a tiny bit of whole cluster, which really made the fruit kind of pop. And it turned out to be really gorgeous. So it's, I mean, gosh, I think this is a little bit more of a, a little bit more of a floral, kind of more of an elegant expression of Shea, but it still has tons of strength, and so I'm really, really excited about this wine.
I gotta shout out to, speaking of someone who's owed a hat, there's a guy on the chair right now named Jack Trimble. Hi, Jack. He used to work in our cellar. He has been making some excellent comments about Peter's amazingness. And I want to say that, the Venn diagram of people that have walked through these walls and have worked in this cellar, have worked in our customer service team, have worked in our marketing department, have worked on the sales side. It's a family truly that goes out into the world and does so many beautiful, cool things. And it's an honor to see that engagement still. We miss you, Jack. And I love your comment about this wine plays rugby, broad shoulders, but light on its feet. Nailed it, my friend. Actually, that was the Shea he said that about. Nailed it. Peter, any other thoughts? And then I'll kind of wrap us up.
Oh, I mean, where to start with Shea? I think that, when we started working with this wine, something with sort of a rap sheet like Shea Vineyards, and as far as me being new in the role, there's a little apprehension, there's a little caution, there's a little like, oh no, what did I get myself into here? And Shea was a tough one to blend. Julian kind of spoke about that briefly, but this was a difficult one for us because we don't have a sort of working palate relationship like we do with Gaps or like we do with Thorn or any other single vineyard or estate wine that we make. So that took us a little while to get used to, but one thing that sort of was just sort of easy to find in the dark for us was the fruit and sort of the tannin profile. With Shea specifically, the tannin profile is just so precise and so polished. It's kind of like comparing the spritz of Topo Chico versus like La Croix. Topo Chico is just like so precise, and there's a great volume of it. And the Qua, you open it up, and it's kind of like it's gone.
I'm describing all wines now based on Topo Chico and the Cloth. That's
Yeah,
or LaCroix,
sure.
depending on
Yeah,
where you're
LaCroix,
from.
right?
Yeah. I love. Nicely done.
Yeah.
Well, I think that should bring us full circle, of course, back to Kiefer sparkling wine. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say, Julian, since you quite literally live there, let's talk a little bit about the Kiefer Ranch Pinot Noir, not to be forgotten, since we've been making that wine since 2005. Also part of this release, 21 vintage, absolutely stunning. We could only open so many wines today, but equally delicious. So if you could talk a little bit about that, and then I'll wrap us up.
Yeah. Well, Kiefer is a beautiful place, and it's a very, very gentle growing season. It's kind of right on the fog line in Green Valley. Green Valley appellation is known for being a slightly cooler climate than the rest of Russian River, and Kiefer Ranch is right in the middle of it. But it's also strangely like on the edge of, where the fog basically socks the vineyard in and where it doesn't. So like there's some mornings where I look out and the fog is completely just on the other side of the ridge, and and these are just rolling hills, so it's just completely filled in. You can see it, but it didn't quite make it over that ridge before Kiefer Ranch, and so but yet it feels, of course, that cool influence from the fog. So and that's why it's somewhat interesting, because at Kiefer, the top half of the vineyard, the vines are going east-west, and that's kind of the gentle slope. And then the bottom half of the vineyard, it's all flat, and that's where we have the Clone 4 Chardonnay that we make sparkling from. And the flat part, the lower part being the cooler section, there's a creek down there, so it's a little bit of a riparian environment. So the cold air kind of like cascades down the hill, and it sinks into the flat part, and it kind of fills in as almost as if it's like imagining a pool, right? Like or just like water kind of filling up a basin. But with all of that, Kiefer Ranch Pinot is very elegant. I mean, beautiful fruit, supple tannins, very, very soft mouthfeel, good acidity, but it doesn't really, stand out in any way. What really stands out is the tannins as being very polished, very soft, very kind of like a pearl, like just a beautiful round sphere. And, it's really known as a very gentle wine. And to be honest, Kiefer and Gaps, they kind of go like hand in hand in terms of, when it comes to Kosta Browne, it's Kiefer and it's Gaps. Those two are the two top single vineyards in terms of our history, our regional, the Russian River, Sonoma Coast. So, I love Kiefer. I might spend a little extra time tending the vines out there and just keeping a close eye on things. But it's really a truly remarkable spot, and it's a special place for Kosta Browne.
True community.
Yeah.
Well, with that, last couple final thoughts. We kind of mentioned that wine is definitely a community of people, not only of people that have joined in the chat that have worked in our cellar. Chef Eric Gephardt was on the chat as well, an incredible chef that we partnered with for all of his charitable efforts, specifically with World Central Kitchen. We, as a community of people, both at the winery and sort of out in the world, have lots of friends in Maui who have been affected by these wildfires, both from restaurants and chefs. And our aloha goes out to you, and thank you for all the support that we've seen kind of within our wine community. We've just done a wine dinner with Chef Eric for World Central Kitchen, and we're doing everything in our power to kind of help one of the most deadly wildfires in American history. So if you're interested, a little plug for our friends over in Maui, MauiRapidResponse.org, World Central Kitchen, also really great resources if you want to get involved. And stay tuned as we, Kosta Browne, continue to support our friends there and make it through. It's we know what it's like working in wine country. Fires are a part of life, and so our heart goes out to them. But to end on a positive note, definitely check out your allocation. For my friends in the trade that may still be waiting for these wines, not a whole lot of these wines are available, but they'll be coming out for our wholesale offer in about a month. For our direct-to-consumer members or our KV members that are on the list and have been waiting patiently, I promise they're worth the wait, as I always say. And if you do have an allocation, jump in there, snag these wines. Please reach out if you have any questions. Follow us on Instagram, check out our website, tons of resources, lots of videos, KostaBrowne.com, Kosta Browne Winery on Instagram and on Facebook. And with that, thank you everybody very much for today. Enjoy some wine, have some bubbles, and have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon.
Cheers all.
Bye.
Thank you so much.